Budapest at 7:30 in the morning. People going to work. Look how low the water is. And over here is the Buda side. Thing to do with the barricades in the middle of the road. Plant greenery in them. Great idea.
The western side of the city on the right, and with the city of Pest.
Cruise ships.
Actually, the land we came to was already outside the land of the city of Pest, despite we left the city center a couple of minutes ago only. And this land is a very centrally located land now. The Whale of Budapest here on the left-hand side, which is basically a cultural, social center where you can find cafes. If you look across the river and you see the building with the beautiful colored tiles, which is the building of the University of Technical Studies, you can also see turn of the century areas, because that land across the river was not only outside the city of Buda, but it was actually totally uninhabited, because there was a big marshland there, because originally it was called Franz Joseph Bridge. Wife, that was Empress Elizabeth, and that bridge is the central bridge of the city. And on the top of the hill you can see the Liberty statue, which is a post-Second World War monument that was erected after the war, originally as a memorial to the soldiers of the Soviet Red Army that liberated Hungary from the Nazi rule. And across the river you can see the center of Buda, the hill that we are in front of, and the hill where you can see the big brown building with the green dome was formerly, before the late 19th century, the territory of the city of Buda. You can visualize how much smaller Buda was. Buda, that was basically the other end of the city of Buda. So that plateau was what Buda grew to, over 10 times larger size. And 15 and 1600s, Hungary was under the rule of the Ottoman Turks, and this is what Hungary was liberated from in the late 1600s by Austria. Austria basically reinvaded Hungary, so the end of the Ottoman Turkish occupation was the beginning of the Habsburg occupation. And these rulers were not very generous to Hungary. In the direction of the Danube, from what it came to the road we are driving along now, which was the official border of the city of Pest, that was formerly inhabited by the Jews. They were moved to here, similarly to the Protestants, other communities too, the 1700s by the Habsburgs, after the Ottoman Turkish times. So the Habsburgs had to bring new citizens to the country. And there is one thing you will learn when you get to Austria, that the Habsburgs were very strict Roman Catholics. The historical churches of Austria are all Roman Catholic churches. And because of this, they only allowed the Catholics inside the city wall of Pest, and the Jews and the Protestants had to live outside of it. So this is the reason why you can still find the central Protestant churches and the main synagogues of the city of Pest outside the pedestrian zone, where we can take a look at the central synagogue, which is a really spectacular construction, and the famous construction, because this is still one of the largest synagogues of the world. It's actually the second largest after the famous Emmanuel Temple in New York. And it's a very unusual synagogue too, with its church-like architectural elements, like the rose window you can see on the left-hand side above the main entrance. Also with its two towers, totally atypical for synagogues. And in the interior you can find some more of them, because among other things there is an organ, conceptually also for a synagogue, because it's a very Christian instrument. Because in the last year of the war, the Nazi Party of Hungary came to power, and then they started a massacre among the Jews, and within a year they killed more than 500,000. And after the war, when Hungary got liberated from the Nazis but invaded by the Russians and made a communist country, many survivor Jews left the country, well, partly for psychological reasons, partly because the communists, when they came in, they started nationalizing everything, which means that they started confiscating private properties and then they left the country, either immigrating to the United States or to the newly founded state of Israel, which was also founded in 1948. In that shape, I mean, the whole area was really a rundown area after the political change, and that was when these old, unrenovated residential buildings started to be rented out. So this is how a new city phenomenon emerged here and became actually a very, very good business. So basically, the Jewish district is the clubbing zone of Budapest too. And the way we leave the Jewish area behind, we come to the point from what you can see the Saint Stephen Basilica from the left, actual pattern of the famous Champs-Élysées of Paris. It follows the same structure and style. Nice and elegant apartment buildings here with pricey shops. Historical social center for high society events. Just look left here. Opera was a venue of royal receptions, aristocrat balls, and other such events until the beginning of the communist system and the communist regime, the communist history, because most of them were converted then to ordinary shops. It'll change. The way we drive further, we drive across the second ring road of Budapest, instead of shops and cafes and restaurants and such things.
What we saw here
and among these public buildings, one of the most renowned units on the roof work, which building is a museum commemorating the victims of those two dictatorships Hungary had in the 20th century. So basically the victims of the state terror from the 20th century history of Hungary. And Germany invaded Hungary, they made a coup d'etat on behalf of the Nazi party, and then they occupied the building, I mean the Nazis, and made it basically a torture center. They created interrogation rooms and other facilities where people were forced interrogated, tortured and killed. They started to need a similar building to the former Nazi headquarters, because they had a very vicious intelligence service system with militias, with armed militias that also just kidnapped people and terrified them in various ways. So they took over the former Nazi headquarters and made it the center of these forces, which is the reason why the building just became the symbol of the dictatorships for an ordinary Hungarians. A diplomatic zone, basically, for embassies of former communist countries. Necessary part of the architecture of all these kind of roads, similarly to the Place d'Étoile at the end of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. So this is the architectural function of the square, which is also a square where you can find and see an open-air exhibition on the Hungarian history.
Statues here of the early tribes that settled here. Empires start here in 896. 1896 was their millennium.
Hungarians started with Saint Stephen.
Saint Stephen.
This was followed a few centuries later by the Ottoman Turkish occupation, starting in the middle, then from the left to the right it goes further on to the end of the 19th century. The Ottoman Turks, as I told you, were ruling Hungary for about 150 years, from the early 15 to the late 1600s, when Hungary was liberated by Austria, called then the Habsburg Empire, that re-invaded Hungary and kept it under control until the late 19th century. Finally, Austria had to realize that she was not able to control Hungary and the whole empire. I mean, the 1848-49 Hungarian uprising, they made an agreement with Hungary. It was a compromise. They gave up their claims on a total control on Hungary.
It's purely symbolic. There's no bodies here.